Scoundrels, written by Paul Caranci, audio by Max Bowen, and edited by Skylar Batz. It has been said that political corruption is as old as government itself. Yet despite its timeless nature and its devastating impact on society, political corruption remains an elusive term. Listen to each episode of Scoundrels for some amazing stories about greed, corruption, and arrogance that sometimes defines politics in America.
Bugs in City Hall, Mayor Brian Sarault. 30-year-old Robert A. Weygand already owned and operated his own landscape architecture business in East Providence when he decided to turn his attention to politics. In 1978, the founder and president of Weygand, Orchich, and Christie Incorporated accepted an appointment to the East Providence Planning Board. He enjoyed the pace and the opportunity to offer his expertise in the future development of his city. So it should have surprised none of his colleagues when in 1985 he decided to seek elected political office and announced a run for a seat in Rhode Island's General Assembly. He was elected to the State House of Representatives and took office in January of 1985. In a very short time, he established himself as a leader when he engineered passage of the new State Zoning Enabling Act, a comprehensive piece of legislation that essentially rewrote the state's outdated zoning laws. His youthful energy and Kennedy-esque appearance escaped no one's notice as he brought together planners, developers, and environmentalists, groups traditionally at odds in such matters, in a working committee designed to enlist their services and solicit their experience in the development of the new laws. Also obvious were his political savvy and leadership skills, as he sought and achieved unanimity from this diverse and potentially divisive committee. Despite his apparent rising star status in the state's Democratic Party, it would be something beyond his wildest imagination that would thrust Bob Weygand into the Rhode Island limelight and make him front-page news. Democrats had another rising star in their ranks. 45-year-old Pawtucket Mayor Brian Sarault was considered by many to be quite good-looking. The dapper and self-assured mayor had been comfortably re-elected to a second two-year term in 1990 and was already being mentioned as a possible gubernatorial candidate. Something of a whiz kid, Sarault graduated high school at the age of 16 and moved on to Providence College. He was a classmate of U.S. Senator and presidential candidate Christopher Dodd and Bristol County District Attorney Ronald A. Pena. Sarault graduated Suffolk Law School in 1969 and began his law practice in Rhode Island. He married at age 27, but that union lasted only 8 years. He entered the political world in 1977, winning his first election, earning a seat on the Pawtucket City Council. Many years later, on a hot July day in 1991, Sarault walked from his office to Main Street to attend a ceremony marking the renovation of an old fountain. A passerby paused when he saw Sarault, walked over to the mayor, and asked him about the troublesome newspaper headlines. Sarault smiled. It was the kind of question he had heard often since his arrest a month earlier on the charge of extortion. This fellow named Weygand came along. Sarault reassured the stranger in a melodic voice. I sold him some fundraiser tickets and somehow he got confused. Don't believe everything you read in the newspapers. I was a lawyer 20 years, and I know better than to try a case in the paper. Just give me my day in court. Sarault convinced this man, as he had convinced so many others since his arrest, that he was innocent. That ability, in part, was why he was such a successful politician. Not only did he have the ability to dismiss his flaws and contradictions, but he was also able to turn them to his political advantage. Those familiar with Pawtucket politics talk about Sarault's charm, his charisma, and how those traits have given him the ability to negotiate political minefields. He's a master of that, said City Council President Raymond Houle. He gives the impression he's being picked on, and he's got this mesmerizing manner. More than anything else, I think that's what propelled him into office. Sarault's charisma and charm, however, were not enough to hold his marriage together. In 1980, just as he was about to begin his second term on the council, Sarault's wife Deborah filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, and saying that Brian Sarault had been guilty of extreme cruelty. As part of the settlement, Sarault had to sell the home he owned with his wife Deborah and purchase a new home for her. He purchased one at 15 Concord Street in Cranston, Rhode Island, from an elderly woman by the name of Irene L. Mulick. Mulick, who was ill and was having trouble paying her bills, agreed to sell the house for $40,000. Sarault was also able to convince Mulick to loan him $15,000 for the down payment, and to do so without consulting an attorney or requiring collateral. The terms of the promissory note indicated 12% interest, and simply required repayment within 12 months. Mrs. Mulick died in 1985, having never received one penny toward the loan repayment. Not only did he not offer payment, but 14 months later, just 2 months after final payment had been due, Sarault visited Mulick, who by now lived with her sister, 84-year-old Marion F. Burns of Pawtucket, and allegedly asked her to let him borrow more money. Burns' husband, who overheard the conversation, threw Sarault out. Sarault later denied asking for more money, and said he was visiting Mrs. Mulick to make new payment arrangements. Mulick filed a civil complaint against Sarault on September 13, 1982. According to court documents, Sarault filed bankruptcy 9 days later, owing $142,825.32 and claiming assets of $4,073.07. The bankruptcy was resolved in 1985, with Sarault's 12 creditors each taking a share of his assets. Miss Mulick's estate was repaid just $536.25 of the $15,000 she loaned Sarault. She died 7 months before the bankruptcy was settled. While struggling with his financial issues, Sarault married for the second time. Margaret Mary Peggy McNamee, a dental hygienist in Warwick, and Sarault were married on January 22, 1984. Less than 1 year later, Sarault announced he would run for mayor. However, as his campaign efforts were unfolding, his father and younger brother were in federal court in Florida, facing fraud charges from allegedly bilking at least $600,000 from borrowers in a loan scheme. Amy Sarault, Brian's father, was eventually acquitted, but Stephen Sarault was found guilty on February 23, 1985. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison and fined $2,000. He spent most of his time in the Federal Correction Institution at Loretto in Pennsylvania. Brian Sarault claims to have had a falling out with Stephen and says he never visited his brother in prison. Regardless, the family scandal may have had an adverse effect on the campaign, and Sarault lost the election by 352 votes to Henry Kinch. In 1987, Pawtucket's Mayor Kinch decided not to seek re-election, leaving Sarault in a personally bitter battle for the office against Councilwoman Kathleen McGill. The contest became very personal in nature, and was extremely close when McGill made a decision to release records regarding Sarault's bankruptcy and divorce. She argued that a person who couldn't manage his own finances might have trouble managing the finances of a city, but the decision turned out to be a bad one. Sarault portrayed himself as a victim being persecuted by someone with a complete lack of compassion. Sarault won the election, capturing 63% of the vote. Along with the good news of his wide margin of victory, Sarault's personal financial fortunes began to turn around. By 1988, Sarault had purchased a $131,000 home in Pawtucket and a condominium in Cape Cod. In addition to his personal good fortunes, Sarault's fundraising reached new heights. Sarault's campaign finance reports disclosed that he raised over $600,000 since deciding to run for mayor in 1985. In 1989, Sarault found himself embroiled in another difficult battle for re-election. Sarault spent over $283,000 to win that race, and in the process, established a new spending record for a city race outside of Providence. He captured 55% of the vote in defeating former councilman and state representative Thomas E. Hodge. A short time later, in August of 1990, the landscape architecture firm of Weygand, Orschlick, and Caranci Incorporated was awarded a $43,360 contract to provide landscaping upgrades to Pawtucket's Slater Park. In March 1991, the city planning department asked the firm to do more work at the park. So, in April 1991, when Weygand received a phone call from Pawtucket Mayor Brian Sarault, he naturally assumed they would discuss the park's design. Instead of engaging in a lengthy conversation, however, Sarault simply asked to meet personally with Weygand to discuss the contract change. Weygand first met with Sarault on April 18th, saying he needed money for a tough election coming up. Sarault allegedly asked Weygand to inflate the cost of the additional work by $5,000. At that meeting, the mayor turned up the radio and laid out a scenario under which he would get $3,000 and Weygand would keep $2,000. Weygand was stunned. After 9 years in business, dealing with municipalities on a regular basis, no one had ever tried to extort money from him. In those few seconds, Weygand would later say, You think about the good and the bad and everything else in between. And the thing that just kept popping up in my mind was, the most important thing to me has been my family and my reputation. I just didn't want to be part of any of this that would affect either one. Weygand collected his thoughts and told the mayor he would like to participate, but wouldn't be able to come up with the money all at one time. The mayor suggested that instead of a one-time contribution, Weygand could purchase 10 $125 tickets to his upcoming fundraiser. That will provide the cover for the first payment of $1,250. Weygand was troubled, but knew what needed to be done. He first conferred with his wife and then his lawyer and General Assembly colleague Frank Gashin, a close personal friend. The next morning, Weygand called U.S. Attorney Lincoln C. Almond. Shortly thereafter, he went to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and agreed to wear a wire and tape record meetings in Pawtucket City Hall and telephone conversations with Sarault and others that might be related to the park improvements. The opportunity to make the first recording didn't take long to present itself. On May 8, 1991, Weygand received a telephone message from Pawtucket City Solicitor Frederick Jocelyn. The FBI recorded the call when Weygand returned it, and Jocelyn asked him the status of the tickets. Weygand told Jocelyn that he would deal with the mayor on the tickets. The same day, Weygand set up another meeting with Sarault. In preparation for the meeting, the FBI gave Weygand $1,250 in marked bills and wired him for sound. On May 15, 1991, Weygand and Sarault met in the mayor's office, where Weygand presented Sarault with two contracts, each document containing a different option for padding the contract by $5,000. After selecting one of the options, the parties signed two originals. With Weygand still present and the FBI listening in, Sarault called City Planning Director Robert Weygand and asked him if it would be a problem to increase the contract by $5,000. Weygand said it would not, Sarault told Weygand. Weygand gave Sarault the $1,250 and left. 2 days later, on May 17th, Weygand returned a call he had received from Sarault the previous day. The FBI was listening in when Sarault asked him how many tickets he intended to use. Weygand said he needed 2, and the mayor said he would put Weygand down for 3 and use the rest for some of my people.
Are you enjoying this podcast? If you are, make sure you go listen to Terror in Wichita. Written by Paul Caranci, read by Max Bowen, and edited by Skylar Batz. Terror in Wichita is a true story of one woman's courage and her will to live. If you want to hear more, the podcast is on all major streaming platforms. Terror in Wichita.
Shortly after hanging up, Weygand mailed an invoice for the additional services part of the transaction. On the day of the fundraiser, May 21, 1991, FBI agent Nicholas J. Murphy listened to another conversation in which Sarault told Weygand that Gerard, who was in the room next to Sarault, said that Weygand's city check for part of the contract work would be available that week. When the check was not ready by Friday, Weygand called again and was told that Sarault would straighten out the payment to Weygand so he, Sarault, could get the second half. When asked by Weygand if he was referring to the $1,750, Sarault answered, right. Weygand was again fitted with a wire and a body microphone on Wednesday, June 12th, before walking into Sarault's office to deliver the second payment of $1,750. It was just before 1:30 in the afternoon. Weygand had been nervous and concerned that Sarault might try to run his hand across Weygand's back to feel for a wire. He was also aware enough to position the recording device elsewhere on his body. Weygand and the FBI had anticipated correctly, for as Weygand turned to walk out of Sarault's office just a few minutes later, Sarault patted Weygand's shoulder and quickly ran his hand all the way down Weygand's back to the waist. Shortly after Weygand left Sarault's office, 2 men who identified themselves as FBI agents walked in and presented Sarault with arrest warrants for extortion, mail fraud, and accepting an illicit payment as an agent of the organization that gets federal funds. The office was searched, and Sarault was taken to federal court in Providence, where he pled not guilty before U.S. Magistrate Judge Jacob Hagopian. Sarault's wife Peggy stood by his side. The FBI and state police detectives, meanwhile, executed search warrants at Pawtucket City Hall. Sarault, who on June 3, 1991, had announced that he would run for a third term on a reform platform, now found himself looking at up to 35 years in prison and $750,000 in fines. Rather than facing 34-year-old city councilman William Lynch, son of former Pawtucket Mayor Dennis Lynch, and Sarault's harshest council critic, he would be facing a judge. Later that night, Sarault's lawyer, Charles G. Rogers Jr., told reporters that the charges were nothing more than allegations, and the mayor had no intention of resigning. Despite Rogers' pronouncement and Sarault's claims of innocence, Sarault's problems continued to mount. Allegations surfaced that city money collected from the payment of tickets resulting from an ingenious, though controversial, way to raise revenues through an aggressive police crackdown on speeders, called the Pawtucket Accident Reduction Enforcement Program, were being diverted to Sarault's campaign account. The crackdown, which was launched in June 1989, nailed more than 22,000 speeders in the last year, 1990, and raked in about $1.4 million. An outside auditing firm hired by the city council began investigating the program, which is believed to involve up to $600,000 of missing funds. In addition, on August 14, 1991, a federal grand jury handed up a second extortion-related indictment against Sarault for a 1990 attempt to solicit a $5,000 kickback from an engineering firm seeking a contract with the city's Public Buildings Authority. Sarault maintained his innocence and refused to step down, although he did declare that he would no longer seek a third term as mayor of Pawtucket. The two cases were merged and were scheduled for trial in the fall of 1991, despite a defense motion plea to keep them separate. Kevin J. O'Day, arguing for the defense, said that the jury might confuse the two cases. Prosecutor Edwin J. Gale countered that the two alleged criminal acts were identical schemes that occurred less than 10 months apart. Judge Torres agreed with Gale and denied the motion. On October 4, 1991, a federal grand jury indicted Sarault and 39-year-old Louis S. Simon, the city's acting public works director, on charges that they extorted $10,500 in kickbacks from two city contractors hired to make improvements to city playgrounds and parks. The indictment alleged that Sarault and Simon extorted a $3,500 kickback from Walter R. Leonard-Toes and his business, Pawtucket Fence and Iron Works, after the business was awarded a $33,508 contract in August 1989. In a second indictment, Simon was accused of extorting $7,000 from Dominic A. Rucco and Thomas S. Borkowski. The company, Dare Incorporated of Rehoboth, Mass., was hired as a subcontractor by Seaview Construction Incorporated of Providence to perform work worth $229,400 in city parks. The new charges against Sarault included extortion, conspiracy, and the illicit receipt of money by a government official, and the interstate use of a telephone facility to further extortion and mail fraud. These charges were also combined with the previous charges, resulting in a total of 18 extortion-related charges. Convictions on all counts could have put Sarault behind bars for 115 years, as well as forcing him to pay $2.5 million in fines. Sarault, who still refused to leave office, did start to lose the support of his peers. Council President Raymond W. Houle, once a close ally of Sarault's, called him a total disgrace. Perhaps more disgraceful was the fact that Simon was suspended, while Sarault still held office. In early November 1991, Robert E. Mativier was elected to succeed Sarault as Pawtucket's mayor. On November 7, 1991, at about 9:30 a.m., Brian J. Sarault and his wife Peggy gathered about 25 city workers in an old courtroom next to his City Hall office and told them that he would resign his office about 2 months prior to the expiration of his current term. In a carefully worded one-page statement issued to the press, Sarault said, "I am truly and deeply sorry for what I have caused, and wish only that I had not done so. To those people who gave me their support, loyalty, and trust, I say I am deeply sorry and hope that I can someday earn your forgiveness." While Sarault stopped short of admitting guilt, his resignation fueled speculation that he had worked out a plea bargain with prosecutors. Council President Houle, who had taken over the day-to-day city operations since June, prepared to take the oath of office as interim mayor until Mativier's term would begin. It took him this long to do the honorable thing, but at least he finally did it. Houle said. This gives us the opportunity to put the house in order before Bob Mativier comes in. The next day, Sarault pleaded guilty in U.S. District Court to accepting or soliciting more than $300,000 in bribes and kickbacks while he was mayor. Simon pleaded guilty to one count of extortion. Both men agreed to cooperate with federal investigators. A sentencing date was set for January 24th, 1992. U.S. Attorney Lincoln C. Almond, who up to this point refused public comment on the Sarault investigation, finally broke his silence, saying that just about anyone who held a high-level position within Sarault's administration is a likely target of the ongoing investigation. Despite the admission, the city council wasn't satisfied. They hired a Boston lawyer, R. Robert Popeo, a fraud investigation specialist who, a few years later, would defend Governor Edward DePreet's son Dennis in his public corruption case, to investigate Sarault's dealings and issue a report to the city. On November 19, 1991, the council received the 40-page report that said in part, Brian J. Sarault's administration regularly circumvented bidding procedures to steer city contracts to campaign contributors and companies paying kickbacks. Even companies submitting the lowest bids were often paid, at Sarault's direction, thousands of dollars above their original estimates. The report urged the investigation of former city solicitor Fred E. Jocelyn for possible theft of city services and breach of duties. The report also said that city employees regularly violated the city charter by soliciting campaign contributions for Sarault on city time. The report urged that the city sue vendors and city officials, including Sarault, under the Federal Racketeering Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Houle and Mativier said that the city would more than likely follow that recommendation. On Friday, January 31st, 1992, Judge Ernest Torres sentenced Sarault to 5.5 years in prison for his role in the extortion ring. Although the sentence could have been as much as 20 years in prison, prosecutors argued for a sentence of only 4 years, 9 months, citing the fact that Sarault was cooperating with the investigation. In imposing the longer term, Judge Ernest C. Torres said there were many victims of the scheme: taxpayers, legitimate vendors who couldn't get work because they wouldn't play ball, the citizens of Pawtucket who found their trust in government eroded, and honest public officials who served the public interest but are now under the cloud of suspicion. Louis Simon was sentenced to 46 months in federal prison for his part in the scheme. How could a charismatic elected official with a promising future in politics go from being a hard-working lawyer with an unblemished record to a power-hungry Pawtucket mayor demanding bribes and kickbacks? No one that knew him well would have predicted that he was capable of such behavior. One reporter said Sarault offered this explanation. Once he took office as mayor, it was a different story. People who wanted to do business with the city promised to make it worthwhile for him, and he succumbed to the temptation, soliciting contributions and bribes. In the mayor's job, you just get caught up in this fundraising activity. I got caught up like I never should have got caught up, he said. Sarault offered a similar explanation in an attempt to regain the law license he had lost when he was disbarred on December 12, 1991, after pleading guilty to one count of racketeering. Pleading his case to a 3-member panel of Massachusetts Board of Bar Overseers, which has the power to reinstate him as a lawyer, despite the racketeering conviction and the 5.5 years he spent behind bars. In a letter to the board, Governor Almond, who prosecuted Sarault when he served as U.S. Attorney, wrote, "In light of his conduct as a public official and his subsequent incarceration for racketeering, Mr. Sarault has established that he does not have the moral or ethical strength to represent members of the public in any capacity." On July 29, 2002, Justice Sozman of the Supreme Court of Suffolk County, Mass., denied the reinstatement, noting that the petitioner failed to prove that he has the moral qualifications required for admission to practice law, and that his resumption of practice will not be detrimental to the integrity or standing of the bar, the administration of justice, or the public interest. In 1992, Bob Weygand successfully sought to become Rhode Island's 65th Lieutenant Governor and served in that position until 1997, when he ran for an open seat in the United States House of Representatives. He served in the U.S. House for 4 years, before challenging Lincoln Chafee for a seat in the United States Senate. The one election Weygand did not win.
Listen to next week's episode of Scoundrel to find out what happens next. Politics, corruption, and so much more. Follow along. Thanks for listening.
Elite Handyman Services, over 35 years of trusted residential and commercial expertise. Elite Handyman Services is reminding motorists to slow down in residential zones and arrive alive. Never text or drink and drive. Elite Handyman Services, a name backed with over 35 years of experience in residential and commercial work. A full-service handyman. From home improvements, remodels, electrical, construction, plumbing, they do it all. 401-246-4197. That's 401-246-4197, or log into EliteHandymanServicesLLC.net. Professionals who care.